And then the second one is imagine you are the person you want to become and literally rewire your
Mm.
brain, which is, you were starting to kind of touch on that.
Okay. Yeah. That's really interesting. That actually comes from research, I believe back in the 1990s, where researchers wanted to watch the brain as it learned something new. They're getting all this new technology of MRIs and SPECT scans. They can finally watch the brain in real time, because before that, all they knew about the brain is what they could derive from sociological experiments and
Yeah.
autopsies on dead brains. And so now they can actually watch the brain communicate with itself and the other neurons in real time. And so they wanted to watch the brain as it learned something new. And so they decided to teach people piano. So they brought in a bunch of volunteers who didn't know how to play piano. And they showed them the simple little scales and the exercises and the little songs you learn as a beginner. They also had the control group, because when you want to publish something, you have to have that control group. So they didn't do anything. And so at the end of the research study, they can show, here's a brain that didn't do anything, didn't learn anything new. Here's a brain that's learning piano. What are the differences? Compare and contrast. They had a third group who played piano but didn't learn anything. They just randomly went over the keys just without learning anything, just like playing notes for an hour and nothing else. But what's extraordinary is they had a fourth group who only pretended to learn piano. And so they brought them in, they showed them the simple little scales and the exercises and the little songs you learn as a beginner. But instead of sitting at the piano, they went over, sat down on the couch or the recliner, and they only pretended. They just
Oh.
daydreamed. They only imagined that they were playing the piano. And so at the end of this week, a week or two, they looked at everybody's brains. Of course, the control group, nothing changed. They didn't learn anything new. They didn't do anything different. So of course their brains don't change. So no big mystery there. The group that actually played the piano, they worked the keys with their fingers. They did the exercises and the scales. They heard the music, the little songs with their ears. They read the sheet music with their eyes. They developed a new neural pathway in the part of the brain for music and learning. Of course they did. They're learning music. Of course they're going to rewire their brain and change their brain. The group who only randomly just played keys on the piano, they didn't learn anything. So nothing changed in their brain. They didn't learn anything. They didn't do anything new. They just randomly playing nothing. But what's extraordinary is the group who only pretended to play. They didn't touch the piano. They didn't hear any music. They didn't see any sheet music. The group who only pretended to play piano also developed the same neural network in the same part of the brain for music. It looked like they were playing the piano, even though they never touched one. And so if you don't have the confidence, you don't have the joy, you don't have the happiness, you can have it. It may be as simple uh, as pretending you
Yeah.
do. You know, if you're not confident in something, let's say somebody has to give the big speech at the conference or at the meeting or something, and they're not confident about it. Well, you're confident in a great many things. You're confident that you can tie your shoes. You're confident you can walk down the street. You're confident you can ride maybe a bicycle or something like that. Zip up a jacket, button your shirt. You're confident in a great many things. Where do you feel that in your body? And I'll just link that feeling of confidence to giving that speech and then practice that. Even if
Yeah.
you don't believe it, even if you have to pretend, it'll literally wire your brain. Now, part of the issue is if I hand you a glass of water, Lisa, and put a teaspoon of dirt in there, and then put 2 teaspoons of sugar, it's still a glass full of dirt, you know.
Still muddy
And so,
water.
yeah, so you want to remove the dirt and things, but there are ways of improving your life. Just because you remove the trauma and the hurt and the pain doesn't automatically fill you full of joy and happiness. Maybe it
Right.
does, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's going to fill you up. So practice that. And
Is it
many
almost like a
people,
fake it till you make it? Is that where that saying
exactly
kind
what
of
that,
came from?
exactly what that is. And many people, you maybe Lisa and a lot of your listeners may remember the Soviet Union in the 1970s was very dominant in the Olympics and gymnastics.
Mm-hmm.
They had Nadia Comaneci and all those
Yeah.
people. They would win the gold, silver, and bronze. They'd win all the world championships, and nobody could figure out what they were doing differently than everybody else in the world to be so dominant in gymnastics. And at the end of the 70s, the early 1980s, some of the athletes and the coaches started to defect, and of the gymnastics team. And what we found out is that the gymnastics team was spending at least 50% of their time in mental rehearsal.
Whoa,
So
I didn't know
they would
that.
get on the mat and they would, yeah, there's books written about this in the early 80s.
Wow.
They would get, let's say they're doing the mat. They would practice, of course, the jumps and the twists and the turns and the tumbles and all that stuff to the music, whatever they're doing. And then after a day of practicing, they would sit on the couch, they sit on the recliner, close their eyes, and do it again, and do it again. And maybe they're doing it regular speed, maybe they're doing it slow motion, maybe they're doing the last 30 seconds, maybe they're doing the parallel bars or the uneven bars or whatever, and they're doing the last 30 seconds of the dismount. But they're doing that. Now we know why that worked,
That's
because
interesting.
they're literally wiring that into their heads. And this becomes very, very concerning, and maybe is the right way to say this, becomes very concerning because what if you're practicing failure? What if you have to give that speech
Ooh.
at that conference next month and you're seeing yourself stumbling over your words, your PowerPoint's upside down,
Oh,
people are laughing and rolling their eyes, and it gets bigger and bigger. They're throwing rotten tomatoes at you, they're chasing you off the stage. What if you're practicing failure? What if you're practicing not being the best person you can be? Are
oh
you
my
not literally
gosh.
wiring that into your brains? And so, I don't,
Wow.
of all the things to do in your life, if you could practice just being the person you want to be, even just for 5, 6 minutes at a time, practice having all the health and the vitality and the energy and the happiness and the joy and the confidence and the success and the abundance and the gratitude, whatever it is you want, you can have it. It just may take it wiring that into your brain.
Yeah.
But this is why, as we get older, they tell you to, in retirement age, and you're getting into your 70s and 80s, they learn chess, learn
Yes.
dance, learn a
Yep.
foreign language, whatever. They want to keep the brain, otherwise it just
Active.
gets stagnant. And so keep the brain active, and so learn joy, learn
Well,
happiness, just like you're learning martial arts.